Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Motilities webinar series. This is Griffin Greer with the Professional Services Department, and this afternoon we're going to begin with an accounts receivable session here in just a few minutes. This should mirror what we saw this morning, looking at accounts payable, but we're just doing the process in reverse, where we're bringing transactions or payments into the system to our clearing accounts to be deposited to the bank. So for those of you who you might not have seen any sort of accounts receivable in the system before, you're going to see pretty much just about everywhere you can get that keyed in automatically. We'll do maybe a transaction by hand, show some of the aging reports, and then you'll know the process in full. So we'll give a few minutes here for any folks that are joining last minute. So I'll go ahead and start this at about 2:05 Eastern, so about 4 minutes to just take a break, top off your coffee, and get ready for the accounts receivable webinar. All right, everybody. Thank you for your patience. It looks like we've got everyone joined that will be attending this afternoon's accounts receivable session. So for those of you who are with us this morning, welcome back. Anyone new attending, hope these webinars are helpful to you. Really just touching on multiple pieces of the software, just trying to bring it all together so you kind of understand the whole thing as a whole. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our accounting module. We've talked about before in our previous sessions that whichever accounting module you open, typically you're doing the accounting for the entire corporation. Usually the location that you open up your accounting at will just predefine which profit center defaults when you create new transactions. So usually you're always going in at profit center A, and the reason I show that is if I were to add a new ledger entry to the Z1 journal, any transaction I start writing in will start populating the A profit center. Now I can always flip that and reroute it, but if you're making entries for rooftop B all day, it would make the most sense to default that profit center to B. So either open up the accounting from the B location, or like you saw, you could just change that first prompt when you get in. So let's talk about accounts receivable. There are numerous places in the system that accounts receivable transactions can be generated from, whether that's the contracts and transit balances coming from posted deals, or factory rebates coming for unit rebates that you get for selling a certain brand from a manufacturer. Or you could create general accounts receivable, like a customer's storing their unit on your lot. So you have the option to create a recurring monthly invoice that will continue accruing an accounts receivable balance on their entity record for you to then receive against when they do pay. This also will allow you to send out statements to these folks so that they can see what balances are owed and know how many net days they have to follow up. Before we actually get into the process of accounts receivable, I'd like to show some initial setup. And what I mean by that is let's actually navigate to our CRM, because there is a tab called the AR Info tab. And there's actually quite a bit of info there that can help in setting up your accounts receivable credit limits, defaults for that particular entity. And I think that's a good place to start, because many times if you're doing this after the fact, your transactions already have been generated and they don't have the appropriate due dates or net days, etc. So I'm going to pick a customer at random here. I'll pick Danny. Of course, it's a locked record. I will grab a non-locked record. We'll grab Jose's here. So Jose's information is in the system, and we're going to move over to the accounts receivable info tab. Now from here, what you should see is a bunch of different options of how we would like to code this customer's entity. So whether we are setting up what account type they are. So when we just send them a statement, is it a balance forward? Do we look at the detail, or do we only show open ticket items? Depending upon how your dealership operates and what you might possibly send out, that could be different options there. These three options will change how the statement does display for this particular entity. So keep that in mind. You've got information like their default payment amount, if there's a processing fee, what are their credit terms or credit length terms for the payments. You can also set things like an interest rate for late fees. You can track anytime last purchases were made. Or if I want to set up an on-account credit limit for Jose to continue cashing out balances to his account, we can set it up and say, okay, for parts and service, if I don't populate a GL here, it will be any accounts receivable transaction, or in the case, I can pick one particular accounts receivable account, and I can say that we're going to give them a $1,000 credit limit. If I check off late fees, when we run our AR late fees routine in accounting, it will automatically add interest to his balance. And of course, a credit hold if we want to disallow any future on-account payments or on-account transactions for Jose. Same thing we can do on the finance side. So I can go in here, type in finance. What's the finance GL? Typically, it's using the same one since we use departments to associate, which module that came from. Or if it's a unit deposits account, you could use that GL account instead. Again, your chart of accounts may be different, but again, you're just setting these limits up either by GL or saying any finance transaction, needs to be populated there. We're going to go ahead and give them a $500 credit limit here. So now with those both set, let's generate an accounts receivable balance for Jose, and then I'll show you a deal posting and where that contracts in transit balance will also be posted from, so that we can go do receiving on each of those, one of which being more of a customer receivable, the other, of course, being a receivable from your lenders. So I'm going to navigate back over to our parts and service module. I'm just going to create a simple parts ticket with Mr. Montero on it. That way we can just check how do I add balances or on-account charges to a customer record. So we'll come in here, we'll use his entity number on our new parts ticket here. I've just copy and pasted that from my CRM. It's faster than searching by last name. We'll put a few parts on here to charge out to his account. Skip through our invoice reminders, we're good there. We're going to sell 5 of these, with tax, if any, a little under $100 here. So we want to go ahead and cash this out to his account. Upon cashing out, I can select on account. This will allow us to place the full balance or whatever balance remaining onto his account for receiving at a later date and time. We could also assign the on account to a third party. So whether this was an extended warranty company or another provider for Jose that's going to pay this for him, we could cash out, but then place that entity record into the third party on account button, and that will assign the accounts receivable balance to that entity as opposed to Jose. So we can still keep him at the ticket header, but the balance is assigned elsewhere. Click on account. It will let us charge in full. If it does not allow you to charge on account, you either don't have the permissions to do so, or the customer doesn't have a credit limit set higher than the dollar amount you're looking to charge against their account. So keep in mind, you may get a pop-up there warning you, preventing you from continuing. But that's why I wanted to show the CRM portion first. If you get that out of the way, then you won't have any issue on the cash out side. I'll go ahead and email Jose a copy of his receipt, and then I'll show you what it looks like both in the CRM. We'll pull a statement after we do a deal transaction, and then you'll kind of have the full picture of accounts receivable. So maybe his email is jose@motilitysoftware.com. Both his receipt copies are here, both the 3.5-inch thermal as well as the full customer copy. Here's a copy of your receipt. We'll go ahead and send it. Of course, I don't have my email set up through this demo, so that won't actually send the email, but we would find that email both on his customer record with his receipt enclosed, and everything's there for us. We could also go to his accounts receivable tab. We don't see anything yet, but why don't we refresh the screen? I'll just search up his entity number again, and we'll pop, and there's our balance. Okay, so there are a number of places we could, set up different accounts receivable, kind of hard-coded credit limits here. But why don't we go over to see a deal desking example, because we'll want to start then receiving in these payments after I show both examples and I show you what the statement will look like. So let's go to deal desking. I'm going to pick a deal that's marked as done. Right, I've got all my done deals here, and I want to find one that has not been sent to accounting yet. The reason for this is I want to show what that accounting transaction will look like. So here we've got a deal. I'm looking at the sent to accounting box. If there's no date there, you know that this has never made it over to accounting. So this was a deal that was delivered back in September. Looks like no one actually posted it. So I have funding from Merrick Bank sitting on my desk, and I'm wondering why I can't find the receivable in the system. Well, it's likely because this deal has never been posted to accounting. I do have Merrick Bank selected up here as my finance source. If I go into the buyer's order or our quote tab, I can find that our contracts in transit balance is about $113,000, almost $114,000. So that should show as receivable to Merrick, from Merrick, aged based on the date of delivery. That's when we're posting our deal as. And the finance reserve amount, if keyed in, will also populate on the receivables tab. So again, Didn't look like anyone picked the reserve here. I'm going to choose a reserve offset to our APR here. So our sell rate versus our buy rate. That's a hefty reserve. Let me populate this in a direction that makes this a little bit more realistic. Forgive me, I'm not a finance guy. All right, there's an $8,000 reserve on a contracts in transit balance of $114,000. I'm pretty good with that. So we'll go ahead and save our deal. We'll probably have to reprint contracts, right? Because our finance manager printed all this info and probably sent it to the bank without that finance reserve calculation assigned. So this would need to be redone. We reprint everything. Customer's happy. They understand, that we just didn't get keyed in there, but that's still funded by Merrick. And then we're going to go ahead and hit post to accounting. The system will prompt if any ROs are open, warning you that, this cost here is just an estimate. That's why it's in yellow. If this cost does change after we've posted this deal to accounting, we would need to either repost the deal to grab and collect all those service adjustments above what our estimates show, or we would make a journal entry to, remove the remaining balances out of inventory into our vehicle cost account. Typically, the easiest is just reposting the deal. So I went ahead and hit post, and we're generating a new accounting transaction. Everything is in balance posted. We won't walk through the entire deal entry, but there's two lines I want you to focus on, and that's account number 1120. That's the contracts in transit balance assigned to Merrick Bank, our lender in this deal. And if you notice, there's our separate contracts in transit balance, and then there's our finance reserve balance. You can tell based on the comments made. Some folks do choose to use a separate accounts receivable account for the reserve, separate from contracts in transit. I don't find that too necessary because it does itemize the balances as well as giving the the info right there on the comment. But if you so choose, you could set up a separate GL account in your chart of accounts to accommodate that. But with this entry being posted, everything is good in balance. Our deal is done. We'll go ahead and mark the status to post it to accounting to reflect us hitting the button there. Mark the deal as saved, and now I could continue on and do the same for the rest of these deals to get that funding there. But now I'd like to confirm both what I have coming in so that these checks on my desk do make sense and I can apply them correctly. So why don't we compare to our example we made this morning, and we're going to go to reporting and pull up our accounts receivable aging reports. Now, there are a good amount of AR reports in here, just like we saw on the AP side. I don't believe you would need to use all of these, but probably picking and choosing between them and finding the ones that work best for your team would be my suggestion. Now, we do have a dedicated accounts receivable contracts in transit AR report. But we're really looking for anything aged in AR, because we are both looking for that customer record there for Mr. Montero, as well as our Merrick Bank lending. So aging reports, there's a good number of them in here. They can all be exported directly to Excel if you prefer working in that format. But I'm actually going to choose the by transaction. The reason for this is it shows the debits and the credits. So if a payment was misapplied or the wrong reference number was being used, it would still show on this report, and obviously we can attend to that going forward. So I'm going to go ahead and run this for our store, company number 1. I'm not going to specify by any GL account, and it should be pretty good. Now, it is warning me that I do need a GL account range. So that's fine. We'll go ahead and hit that ellipsis there. It will filter for all AR accounts. Why don't we start with 1100 and work our way down to 1180. So our ending GL can be 1180. And now I'm pulling every receivable balance currently in our system. Now, this being a demo environment, who knows how long this report is going to be? Looks like quite a few pages. If you ever pull a report and it's running forever, you can hit the escape key to stop it. Why don't we reduce our range of GLs here just so it's a little bit less to work through? And I know the two accounts that we're working between for on account should be between that range. This will probably still be a good number of pages because, again, remember, this is a demo environment that isn't to maintain, but we would expect to find both Merrick Bank's lending transactions on here as well as Mr. Montero's. We'll go ahead, 197 pages. Well, that's not too bad. Hope this doesn't ever end up this long in a live environment. So here's what I would do. To find this quickly, I'm going to search find. Let's search for Mr. Montero's name. Let's see if he's populated on here. It's going to search through all of these pages. Found him on a few. I know there's a couple Montero records in here, but I believe the one that we've been utilizing is this one right here. Here are some receivable balances. This is a different one, it looks like. Let's try this one. There it is. So again, the advantages of making sure that your system entities are consolidated, you want to make sure not having any duplicates. Otherwise, you would be searching through, multiple records for the same customer. But here we found Mr. Montero's $89.95 on account balance we've placed. I see some most recent comments about his recent, visits to the dealership. And I would know that his $89.95 check sitting on my desk is a good check to receive into the system to clear that balance. So we're good there. We can do the same search for the Merrick Bank entity. But likely you wouldn't have to do these searchings or this searching simply because, you're likely going to have a much slimmer accounts receivable balance, at least I hope so, than 197 pages. So as you can see, I've got multiple Merrick Bank entities in the system, making it difficult for me to know which one is which. Again, the power of consolidating your entities and keeping them cleaned up prevents your system from looking like this demo database where now you're having to wade through all these different entities. So why don't we just do this? We're going to go in. I know Merrick is my entity number because I've seen, it was spelled with the 1R. So now, why don't we go in and find that deal posting, and we'll do it through the receivable screen. So back in the accounting module, there is a section here called Receive Pay on Accounts. I know I've spent most of this initial webinar talking about receiving and where they come from. Well, the actual process of accounts receivable is actually fairly simple and it shouldn't take too long. Why don't we do Mr. Montero's check first? So just like the check writing screen, for those of you who were in our webinar this morning, this should look very similar to what we were doing before. You hit add to begin, and then you start by pulling in your customer's information or lender. In this case, I'm going to pull Mr. Montero's record. Of course, we do have a few. Let's specify by first name. I do have, again, a handful here. I believe it's this one. Actually, I believe it's this one. Let's try that. Hey, we got it. So Mr. Montero's entity has a receivable balance of $89.95. I can view exactly the document that came from by hitting the V button. That will launch the invoice or the transaction. In this case, it was a parts ticket, and I can see, okay, there's the balance. Let's see who cashed him out. Looks like our employee admin here did an on-account payment from this cash drawer, and there's the balance. So with all that information on hand, I can apply this check appropriately. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to minimize there. And let's proceed. So the date we received this was the 12th, month 11, 2020. My reference number could be any number of things. In this case, I could make it my check number. Check number 1234 Montero. However you would want to reference these is up to you. This is how it's going to show up both in your bank account and or your clearing accounts. In this case, we're going to distribute it to our Q1 journal. That's our cash receipts, right? Any incoming cash or payments. What was the pay type that Jose provided to us? Well, he sent us a check, and choosing your pay type there will manipulate the debit side of your transaction, which is going to always be your clearing account. Now, some folks may choose not to use clearing and might debit it directly into the bank account. That's fine. Just replace this GL with your checking or savings account that you're, debiting this amount into. In this case, we're going to put it into our daily deposit screen. I'll show you where that populates. And then this afternoon's training at 3:30 Eastern, we're going to review the daily deposit screen and the bank rec. So we can take this check and apply it, receive it, push it to our bank account, and then, of course, reconcile from there. So with this all being said, there is an amount here, but of course, I would just prefer hitting pay if you paid the full amount. Any check memos or transaction comments you want to add can be populated here. But at this point, I'm pretty much ready to hit save. So if I save my transaction here and exit the screen, I have received that check into the system, and now if I go into my daily deposit screen for today's date, it looks like we've collected about $300.75 of value. Let's find out from where. Well, it looks like there's a cash transaction for $210.80. That's from this morning. And then here's a check, the one we just received, for $89.95. At this point, as I'm moving this into the bank deposit for today and moving this to our checking account, you could send that over and complete your bank deposit. Now, again, like I mentioned, we will be reviewing this again this afternoon. So I won't continue the deposit process, but anything you receive into the system, if it's going into clearing, will land into this screen. Some folks have separate clearing accounts for credit cards, for checks, for cash. Others receive all into one account, and they rely on the pay type to determine, technically what type of transaction it is. However you operate, that funding will always land here in undeposited funds awaiting your deposit to your checking or savings account. Let's do one more. So we're going to go back into the Receive Pay on Account screen, hit Add again. This time I'm going to pull up my Merrick Bank entity. I know their entity number is Merrick with one R. Hey, let's say someone notices that and it's like, why do we have that misspelled? You can always correct entity numbers on the fly. Something that a lot of folks fear will mess things up, but I could rename that to the correct spelling, hit Save, and it will retroactively correct every transaction associated with this entity to that new spelling. Pretty straightforward. So now we'll jump right back out. It did correct my spelling there, didn't do anything to my existing transactions. So hey, here's everything that's coming through. Why don't we sort by due date, because it looks like some folks are having trouble correctly receiving these items in a due fashion. So there's some contracts and transit balances coming in recently, but these aren't the items that we saw in our deal, right? So why don't we do a little research? Oh, nope, there it is. Because remember, we had posted these transactions as of the delivery date of that deal, and those then showed up in September. So I have this, in this case, my finance reserve and the final contracts and transit balance added together. And that's fine if we'd wanted to do that, or like we talked about, you could separate those into separate accounts. But I think some funding arrives together, others split it up. I think it's determined on which bank or credit union is funding. But in this case, I'm just going to mark it paid. They sent us a check. And again, I don't know, or maybe they do a wire or something like that. You could always set up a pay type of wire in here. Same thing, we're going to put a transaction. Maybe we do call it the wire ID or the ACH value, 11/12/20. That's today's date. Maybe name it Merrick. Again, that entire reference numbering is up to you. Same thing, we received it as of today's date. Hit Save. Done. You go back into your daily deposit screen. Now we can move this over into our bank account. Okay, so receiving in this system is pretty straightforward. There are some advanced things that we could set up, like creating accounts receivable documents and recurring entries to generate receivable balances month over month for storage or rental purposes. We can dive into that probably more in the one-on-one trainings that your dealerships will receive, because that is a bit specific and not all dealerships will do any sort of accounts receivable invoicing. But contracts in transit receiving, customer on accounts, that seems to be pretty widespread. So that's something I definitely wanted to make sure everybody was familiar with. From this point, I'll go ahead and leave the next couple of minutes here for any Q&A or anything that wasn't, straightforward. Please let me know, and we can try to, answer those questions for you. Otherwise, we will pick up on this session at 3:30 Eastern today, so about an hour from now, and we will continue the process of taking anything that is landing in these these daily deposit screens, and then moving them to the reconciliation program, and then of course reconciling from there. So kind of the next logical progression from us receiving cash in or checks into the system. Doesn't look like too many questions have popped up. It looks like most everyone's dropping off, probably taking a quick afternoon break before our next session. So I'll leave you to it. Everyone have a great rest of your afternoon. And for those of us returning at 3:30, we'll see you then.